the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, waterproof matches join with their more radical strike-anywhere brothers and sisters to oppose banning from the pudgy fingers of 3-year-olds. It's not like 3-year-olds can't use their phones to search how to start a fire with a lighter, says match leader Smokey Holloway. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Toni Daniel. We have part 3 of our excellent interview with David Weber and Jacob Holo, with Baen publisher Toni Weisskopf also stopping by. We discussed the Gordian Protocol, a nationally best-selling science fiction novel by David Weber and Jacob Holo. It's got time travel and spaceship battles, several weird far futures, and a plot to change history. And it's got believable, intelligent heroes from past, present, and future as well. It's a really fun book. David, Jacob, and Toni talk about it, and we conclude the interview this week. And we continue with a complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's great high fantasy novel, Son of the Black Sword. Now, here's the news. Hey, there's a new monthly contest about to go live June 1st, and it's an easy one to enter. Sometimes we want you to write up a paragraph and be all creative and amusing, but June is just too hot for that, so we have an easy contest this time. All you got to do is write out a book title, and this one is for a Liaden Universe book. Sharon Lee and Steve Miller go with shorter titles, unlike that poetic David Drake character, for instance, who seems to make his titles longer than a book sometimes. It's a great big Liaden universe, spanning over 24 novels and many more short stories, novelettes, and novellas. The Liaden universe by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller is one of the most complex, enduring series in science fiction. In June, Baen is proud to release a Liaden universe constellation. That's a collection, Volume 4. And to celebrate, we're asking you to tell us your favorite entry in the long-running series for a chance to win a signed copy of this great new collection of Liaden Universe stories. Just send in the name of your favorite Liaden Universe novel, novella, novelette, or short story to be entered in a random drawing. Send it to contest@baen.com. For more details, check out the Baen.com front page over there on the left-hand side for the link to the contest page. And while you're there, sign up for the bi-monthly newsletters. This is part 3 of a 3-part interview with David Weber, Jacob Holo, and Toni Weisskopf talking about the Gordian Protocol. Part 2 is available on last week's podcast. I want to welcome David Weber and Jacob Holo to the podcast. And we also have with us Toni Weisskopf, Baen publisher. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
David Weber is the creator of the internationally best-selling Honor Harrington series, with latest entry, The Most Excellent Uncompromising Honor, now at booksellers everywhere. David has had 29 New York Times bestsellers, and there are over 8 million David Weber books in print. David is also the author of many other Baen books, including the epic fantasy Basel series, with latest entry, Book 1 in the Ken Holden sub-series, Sword of the South. He's the author of The Road to Hell with Joel Presby, along with 2 other books in the Multiverse series, and out now we have a very excellent new novel by David Weber and Jacob Holo. Jacob Holo is a former Ohioan, former Michigander, living in sunny South Carolina. He describes himself as a writer, gamer, hobbyist, and engineer who started writing after his parents bought him an IBM 286 desktop back in the 80s. He's been writing ever since. At booksellers everywhere now is The Gordian Protocol by David Weber and Jacob Holo. This is a new adventure science fiction novel set in a totally new Weber milieu with both spaceships, far future tech, and most of all, mind-bending time travel.
Well, this is one of the things I like about this book is human fallibility. So we think we've figured out time travel, but maybe we don't have it exactly right. We think we figured these things out, but maybe it's not. Maybe this doesn't actually work. And and the idea that our heroes are constantly testing these suppositions is, I think, part of what makes the fun of the book.
Well, I think that's a big part of it. I think another part of it is that the villain who is chasing Raybert all the way through the book, and who is absolutely determined to destroy him, et cetera, is in most ways a good and moral person. Okay, now, Jacob, why don't you, I'm going to let you do this, why don't you explain how I could say that Shigeki is a good and moral person when he has been such a ruthless empire builder? Talk a little bit about that difference between the two 30th centuries and why the way that Shigeki has structured his agency and what he does with it is necessary.
Well, I mean, one of the things that Shigeki does is that, I mean, Raybert is guilty of these monstrous crimes, just for the sake of certain things that, you know, he has technology he's using because
just by existing, yes,
yeah, just by existing. So there's, you know, if Shigeki wants him gone and gone permanently, he has
Jacob.
Yeah.
Why are these things that he has? What is it? What's the difference between the 30th century and admin that makes Raybert's very existence a threat to not the? By the way, we have to fix this problem. I'm talking about the DNA of the two societies.
Before we get to that, let's just say momentarily. Let's talk a moment about the plot. I don't think it's going to be any much of a spoiler to say, bang! Benjamin Schroeder's life completely changes. He's not a professor looking for tenure now. He's in a completely different universe, but he remembers the old. And this has led to a big problem in the future because there are two different futures now. And the bad guy is from a future that's not the same future as Raybert.
Well...
Or maybe not. Anyway, it's not just two different futures. It's a knot.
I prefer the term antagonist to bad guy.
Even though he does treat him rather badly in a permanent sort of sense.
Well, no, but I have to say that Shigeki, part of the problem Shigeki has here is that he treated Raybert too gently when he discovered what Raybert was, quote, guilty of, close quote, simply by existing. All right. Essentially, what we have here is that there has been the guys from Raybert's 30th century and the guys from Shigeki's 30th century, both Siskov and Admin, have demonstrated to their own satisfaction that they cannot change the past. So you can't, for example, as Shigeki, who is the head of a security agency for Admin, you can't go back and arrest, you can't be Tom Cruise, go back and arrest him before he commits the crime. Because, yeah, you could arrest him, you could bring him up to the future, but it's going to reset as soon as you left. He's going to go ahead and commit the crime anyway. You can't prevent something that predates the edge of existence from happening. Okay? You can go back and you can do intelligence gathering, which is what Shigeki does. You can follow this guy back, find his associates, find them in the present, etc., which is precisely what he does. But you can't change the past. Both sides know this. Well, unfortunately, it turns out they were wrong. I can't imagine how that could possibly happen in a David Weber novel. And the past gets pretty cataclysmically trained, creating the Gordian knot. That is where the title of the book comes from. And Raybert doesn't know how the past has changed. He just knows that that despite all the theory that says you can't, that it has changed. and that he has to figure out what's happening because it's created this weakness in the multiverse, and he didn't know it was a multiverse until he found this. He thought it was all just like one universe, and it's not.
Right.
And it's created a situation in which 16 universes have become entangled. There's, for want of a better term, there's a breach in the wall, and energy is pouring through it into one of the universes, and it is moving towards the edge of existence. It's like a time storm, a cyclone howling up the timeline. When it reaches the edge of existence, basically 16 universes will experience the Big Bang all over again. So it's a death sentence for 16 universes if it isn't untangled. And it's about, what, Jacob, 3,000 years in the future of the edge of existence, I think we postulated that this happens. Is that about right?
We actually changed that number, and I forget which number we ended up with, actually.
I think I was originally going to be 5,000, and I think we pulled it back to 3,000 because you were looking at how you had calculated the rate of the time storm's progression, and there was this misplaced decimal point or something, and it was actually 3,000. Anyway, the point is that Raybert sees this as a catastrophe which has to be prevented at all costs. So when he returns to the 30th century, he returns to the 30th century in a universe that isn't his. And he promptly does what a good academic nerd would do. He goes to the authorities to report the problem, and the authorities say, wait, you want to fix it so that our universe never existed so that 15 others will be fine. And this is not going to happen for another 3,000 years? Okay, I'm sorry. I don't think I'm really interested in phasing all of my friends, neighbors, children, and loved ones out of existence. I can't imagine how Raybert, could have possibly anticipated that anyone might react in that parochial, self-centered fashion. And Shigeki is the guy that he reports it to.
That's why he's doing all these illegal things, because in this future, the things that Raybert has are things like nanotechnology, for instance, and self-aware beings and such. These are it's called the Yanlua Protocol or something like that, right? It's a
I told Jacob that we needed a defining sort of technological near miss for both societies to define how they went where they got to. And I especially liked the one that he came up with for Weisskopf. It was awful, but it was also funny. And it was by the way nanotech, but for
turning a whole chunk of China into pinballs.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it was bad. And in admin, the problem was basically Skynet. In a way, it was a Chinese military AI that broke out of the box and started following the only imperatives that it had. And there's a reason that the language that Raybert speaks has a lot of Chinese in it, and the language that Shigeki speaks doesn't. And the reason is that in order to save the rest of the human race, the rest of the world basically had to saturation bomb China to take out the AI that had gotten loose. And so both of these societies have these traumatic technological experiences in their past, and they react to them differently. Okay? And it colors who they are. Admin really and truly, in a lot of ways, is the brutalized child who grows up with a defensive mindset. Okay, and Weisskopf, where terrible as the near miss was, it did a whole lot less damage. Okay. more embraces technology, but with the understanding that you have to keep an eye on the genie. Okay? But does that seem like a fair way to put it, Jacob?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the admin's attitude as they're kind of figuring out, what Weber has and where he comes from is like, wow, this must be a society that prances through the rain thinking they won't get wet. It's like, what are these idiots doing? They're playing with all this dangerous stuff so casually. How have they not blown themselves up yet?
Yeah, and it's coming sometime soon, and this is who we should listen to about what we're going to do with our universe. That's definitely part of it. Another part of it is that Raybert's 30th century is a genuine post-scarcity economy. I mean, it really is. They've accomplished that. Okay, admin is still moving through the adjustment period. And the Jacob and I discussed in detail what this transition was going to be like, in our opinion, what the psychological, sociological impacts were going to be. But we discussed it so that we could incorporate it into the DNA of the two societies, not so that we could actually, go through it in the book. But it kind of colors a lot of what's going on in the admin universe right now. Also, the admin universe is more authoritarian, probably isn't the right word, but the admin basically was imposed by force on the entire human race as a how do we keep ourselves alive kind of thing.
It's pretty totalitarian, David.
Yeah.
I would not want to live in that society. It's pretty evil.
You are incorrect.
Oh, okay, all right.
There's a lot going on there. Okay, remember that Shigeki is doing an end run around the elected head of state for admin because he's afraid that this guy might listen to Raybert and decide that that 16 universes outweigh one universe.
But there's these awful prisons. I mean, there's a lot more virtual reality here. And these prisons tell us a little bit about the worst of them, just to give an idea of it. I love the idea of the one-way domain.
Well, the one-way domain is Jacob's in mind. So, go, Jacob.
All right. So with the Yanlu restrictions, certain technology and information that is not allowed to be out there, they will basically shunt their worst criminals into one-way abstractions, one-way virtual realms, and there's no monitoring, there's no nothing. They just fire them in, and that's that. And one of the reasons why they do that, other than say like just execute the person, is that the admin at the you have to say federal level does not have the right to carry out executions. That's a
physical death
state
penalty.
level right. Yes, but they can suck out your connectome and imprison that, which is what they do.
Jacob, let me throw one thing in here, because this was a distinction that you made early on when we were discussing this that I think needs to be made here. Initially, there are two kind of versions of where you can be imprisoned. Okay, there's the one-way domains that you're committed to forever. Once you're launched into it, you're on your own. As long as the domain is powered up, you're going to be stuck in it. There's no coming back, and it's unmonitored. Okay, and then there are the domains which are monitored by the wardens, and where there are, in effect, connectome guards who control conditions in the domain. All right? And when the domains were first created, Jacob, I think I'm remembering the history of this evolution correctly. When they were first created, they were all one-way domains. and then somebody hacked one of the domains trying to break some folks out, and they got to look at what was going on in there. Isn't that the way that it evolved?
No, they've both always been there.
Okay, okay.
But yeah, you are right that there was a break-in. There was where someone actually got to see publicly what was going on, and essentially some of the prisoners thought that everyone had like a number of times, the maximum number of times they could be killed, and then they would be permanently killed. So they were trying to reach that unsuccessfully. So it was pretty horrific conditions that they found inside the one-way.
Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to make the point that you just made, that this is inside the one-way domains that were unmonitored. Yes. Okay, go.
And so that led to a scandal and pressure to do away with them, which actually is one of the ways that the current chief executive of the admin, who campaigned on a kinder and gentler admin, actually came to be elected. Is that part of his platform is to do away with the one-ways, which a lot of people within Shigeki's inner circle think is not going to happen, because they view the one-ways as necessary, as you need something, you
need something really bad to keep them in line.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what they do, is they use the one-ways to keep people in line. Yes.
Yeah, and Shigeki himself is not an evil, or a certainly not by his lights, but also he takes no pleasure in inflicting suffering even on his enemies and people he think are significant threats to the society that he has sworn to preserve.
Well, he's not a sadist, but that doesn't mean he's not evil.
Well, okay, I'm defining. All right, I don't think of him as an unmitigatedly evil person. What do I know? But the thing is, here's when Raybert turns up. Shigeki has all the evidence that he needs to consign him to a one-way domain where nobody can ever hear his story. It can never leak out. Nobody in Shigeki's universe could ever possibly learn about it and decide that he has something going for him. He would just disappear forever into this hellish existence that would never be terminated. And he has all the evidence he needs under the admin's law to do precisely that. And instead, he chooses to have him committed to one of the humane domains, because his objective is to preserve his universe and everyone in it. And in the process, he's going to do the least harm that he can to this person who he has to eliminate for his society to survive. Okay? And so from one perspective, that is, an evil act. He's a nasty guy and all that. So, yeah, from that perspective, it's kind of like a bad thing he does. From the perspective of what he could have done and under his own legal system really should have done, he's incredibly lenient. And that's one of the reasons why he is so determined to defeat Raybert later on. He's the one who let Raybert become the threat by not being sufficiently ruthless when he first met him and recognized what the threat was. And so now he has to be however ruthless it takes to fix the problem. So I would argue that there's some shades of meaning going on in there where you think about whether or not he's evil. Is he the bad guy? Yeah, he's the bad guy. And is he the ultimate threat to the existence of our universe and a bunch of other universes? Oh, damn betcha, Skippy. But once you get inside who he is and start unpacking what he's doing and why he's doing it, he too is a responsibility taker. It's just that he's taking responsibility for his individual universe. not for the multiverse at large. And it's easier for Raybert to be loyal to the multiverse at large because Shigeki's universe is the mistake, not Raybert's. So Raybert is talking about preserving himself and his universe just the same way that Shigeki is talking about preserving himself and his universe. I think of this more as sort of a yin and a yang than a bad and a good. Do you follow the distinction that I'm making here?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a typical Weber Solarian League good guy captain who's ultimately on the evil side, but just does his due. But talk about, all right, so can we talk about these cool time travel spaceships a little bit? Tell us about Cleo and about chronoports and TTVs and all that, both of y'all, if you will. And how it works and how they're armed.
Yeah. Well, it got fun. Go, Jacob.
All right. So David gave me the very enjoyable task of designing the time machines. We have the TTV, the trans-temporal vehicle, which is Cleo is a non-sentient control program. That's Rybert's ship. And then we have the chronoports, which are the very heavily armed, loaded for bear time machines that the admin's DTI, Department of Temporal Investigation, Shigeki's goons get. And
goons. Here I was talking about nuances, and you throw that word out. Jeez.
Morally cover my
that's what Rybert calls them. He calls them Shigeki's goons.
Okay, one thing here. In the admin universe, in the Weisskopf universe, there is no significant political opposition to the societal matrix. In the admin universe, there are still people who see themselves as resistance fighters. And I mention this because they, too, have some access to time travel technology, which is one of the reasons that Shigeki's units are armed. Because otherwise, it wouldn't matter. You go back into the past and you can't affect it anyway, kind of thing. But they have to be able to deal with rogue time travel, and they have to be able, if they follow trace a rogue time traveler's steps back up to the present. They have to have the firepower to bring to bear. They are a police force both at the past and in the present, I guess is what I'm saying, and that's why they have to have armed units while obviously Raybert, that inoffensive little historian, doesn't. But I just wanted to explain why Shigeki's goons have armed ships. And
should I be using a different word than goon?
Perfectly reasonable evil bastards. So I really love that you named the Weisskopf ship Cleo, which is, we should point out to those that don't not hit over the head with it, is the muse of history, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And Jacob, I will say, Cleo is supposed to be a non-self-aware AI, but she's getting decidedly uppity in some ways.
She's the biggest smart aleck of the whole.
And there's a lot of competition.
She's a very good TARDIS.
Well, I especially liked the conversation that Raybert has with her about whether or not Cleo is supposed to fix all the damage to one of the characters, and where that ultimately leads.
I followed your directions.
I know you did it so well. Anyway, go. I distracted you from talking about how it all works.
So one of the nice things about the the differences between the two that lends itself to making the combat interesting is that the TTV has superior real space maneuverability, but the chronoports are faster temporally. So there's a kind of cat and mouse dynamic going on. And the other thing is that yes, David?
No, I'm sorry, Jacob. I was just going to say one of the things that Jacob built in here is a subtly different way in which the two systems, temporal drive systems, interact with the time stream. And it's made possible by the fact that Sysgov's basic tech level is superior to that of admin. So the admins, I guess, if you wanted an analogy from 20th, 21st century history, admin are the MiG-25, really, really fast, but not real maneuverable because their technology is not as well developed, but they're overpowered time traveling machines. And the TTV is the F-15 that isn't as fast, but is a lot more maneuverable and generally sophisticated. Is that a fair analogy, Jacob?
Oh yeah, and the other thing is that the TTV has, it has a lot more what the admin would consider illegal features, and if they even were to allow them, they would be luxury features. It has extensive self-repair, and because of that, self-modification abilities. And so as the story progresses, it becomes deadlier and deadlier, and is able to take on. Yeah.
But again, it's that element of change within the book that I like. You allow for growth and for change with circumstance, and that's nice to see in a hard science fiction book.
And Jacob did that aspect of Cleo. He took it and ran with it, and it led to a lot of the underlying framework for combat and other events in the book. It's one of the things that is so cool. Yeah, go, Jacob.
A lot of that, a lot of the tech stemmed from just very simple lines in the original outline, David, that you sent me concerning the admin and the Sysgov and the like the expectations of what the time machines would be capable of. And so there was, what happens if a TTV is stranded? You would expect some, self-repair ability. I'm like, self-repair ability. Okay, well, it's got, atomic printers and bulk printers, and I'm drawing up all this stuff, and it's going to have some really cool power supplies. So I'm like, okay, well, let's give it a really tiny black hole that's evaporating for its energy source. Give it an exotic matter shell and do all this crazy stuff.
And what happens here is that between the two of us, we followed the logical implications of the tech base that Jacob had established within the guideline of where I needed the societies to be to define how combat and everything else breaks down in the book. And I think that's one of the things that science fiction is supposed to be about, and that's why I am so absolutely delighted with the synergistic effect that Jacob and I had on each other in this book, because I don't think a lot of this would have occurred to either of us working in isolation. but when we started mixing it together, Jacob likes to call it like, this is like the mixture of peanut butter and chocolate. It just hit that sweet spot, and I think it did. I mean, I don't want to.
Well, there was.
Which one of you is peanut butter?
No, we don't need to know.
Let's not talk about that.
There was one part of the background of Weisskopf that I put in that I really didn't expect to have any relevance on the story whatsoever, and it was about, or not Weisskopf, the admin, one part of the prison system, and which is the abstract domains, the kind of virtual reality prisons that they were using. And David then keyed in on that, and you sent me a question about, what they, send, whether they try to get, Rybert into the prison, or they actually succeed, or, how do we want to treat this if we're going to take this route? And I had an ooh shiny moment. And I said, David, what if we do this? And I kind of like detailed out this prison break, and I sent it to him, and the response was 3 smiley faces, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be so much fun. I think it's safe to say the prison break is my favorite scene.
It's clear that you had a lot of fun writing it, and you have a lot of fun playing with some of these tropes, and that have been used in science fiction before, but you guys bring some new fun stuff to it.
Well, I think absolutely, and I think that the fun that we had writing it, I hope, will come through for the reader as well. This is not a case where we had like different viewpoint characters that we were each writing. This was a case of where we were both writing both sets of characters, all the way through. I don't want to use the wrong term, but the creative tension that created the overall story was in our ability, the pleasure that we were taking, I suppose, in many ways, of riffing off each other while we were writing the book. The initial concept for the novel was mine, okay? But the final novel is not just artistically, but also, I think, to some extent, conceptually different from, and I think better than, the original idea that I had when I invited Jacob to come play in my sandbox, and it turned into our sandbox.
Really exciting thing as a storyteller, and just, working on ideas on, where, at this point, book 3 could go. There's nothing that really, pins us in and, forces a particular path forward. And that kind of storytelling freedom is wonderful. And I think it's going to be a really positive for the series.
And I will say that the final paragraph of In Death Ground, it's very short, it's like only about 3 sentences, kind of lays that out. It's sort of, Rybert gets to hit a redo button, and
not In Death Ground, the Gordian Protocol.
The Gordian Protocol, the Gordian Protocol. And it's one that he's been looking forward to for a long, long time. But yeah, we do have...
Because if we're uniting this in the Starfire universe, I'm going to draw the line.
That is a Gordian knot that maybe no sword could cut.
Well, okay, one of the things that...
This is not a challenge.
Don't get a new shiny moment.
We can make it work. To quote one of my favorite, one of my friends, we can retcon that. there's, there is a okay. This book for me is kind of like where I was with, say, the Apocalypse Troll, in that, or the Excalibur alternative, in that it creates such, I think Jacob used the term freedom. There are so many ways that that the Gordian and Valkyrie and their sequels can go, that we are kind of in a position of being allowing ourselves to unfetter our imaginations.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Did you see what I'm saying, Toni?
Yes.
Well, that was Toni with an I that I was addressing that one to, because she's the one we got to keep happy.
Exactly. Oh, it's pretty easy to tell who you're addressing when it's the big issues. Like, am I going to get paid?
that ultimately depends on the readers.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Did I ever tell you about Nova's comment on how to overcome writer's block? I was on a panel with him, and somebody said, is there anything an editor can do to help a writer through writer's block? And Ben said, yeah, I have an infallible solution. And they said, really? What's that? And he said, take away his credit card. So, there's some truth to that. But I like Toni. This is Toni with an I again. One of the things that I really have enjoyed about being associated with Baen Books for as long as I have is the freedom that you guys have given me to go off and do different things rather than saying, okay, the Honor Harrington books are bringing in buckets of money. We need to do just that. Jim letting me do the first of the Norfressa novels, for example. You guys have never been afraid to let your writers look at different horizons. And that is a huge thing, especially for a successful writer who is going to be under pressure to keep repeating what has been successful so far. You guys aren't afraid to let us go somewhere else. And I think it shows, the upside of that shows in the quality of some of the writers that you have found and helped to develop. I'm thinking about John. I'm thinking about Larry. I'm thinking about a bunch.
I think we have Dave Drake to thank for that. That we've seen over the course of Dave's career how much being able to do different things has helped him and kept him fresh and allowed him to have a long and productive and interesting career, and do interesting things in fantasy and do interesting things in science fiction and do interesting things in military science fiction.
Ultimately, the final product will be better and stronger because it's what that person needs to be doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do.
And that final product is the Gordian Protocol. It's not the final product, but it is a interesting new direction for David Weber writing with Jacob Holo.
It has one of the best covers Baen has ever given me. And they've given me some good ones, but I really like the cover on this one.
I think I was inspired by the Ooh Shiny.
Yeah.
A fabulous cover.
It is great.
Who is the artist again?
It's Dave Seeley. Seeley.
This. You want to be pleased by any book that you release. There are very few that have been just as flat out much fun to write as this one. And I am totally pleased with the final outcome, which wouldn't have been there if I had written it by myself.
Well done, guys.
That was part 3 of a 3-part interview with with David Weber, Jacob Holo, and Toni Weisskopf talking about the Gordian Protocol. Part 2 is available on last week's podcast. Now we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia, Book 1 in the Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. After the War of the Gods, the demons were cast out and fell to the world. Mankind was nearly eradicated by the seemingly unstoppable beasts, until the gods sent the great hero Ram Rowan to save them. He united the tribes, gave them magic, and drove the demons into the sea. But as centuries passed, the descendants of the great hero grew in number and power. They became tyrannical and cruel, and their religion nothing but an excuse for greed. The people rose up, and the surviving royalty and their priests were made casteless, condemned to live as untouchables. The age of law had begun. Ashok Vidal has been chosen by a powerful ancient weapon to be its bearer. He is a protector, a member of an ancient military order of roving law enforcers. No one is more merciless in rooting out those who secretly practice the old ways as Ashok. But Ashok isn't who he thinks he is. And when he finds himself on the wrong side of the law, the consequences lead to rebellion, war, and perhaps transformation. Now here is the latest entry in Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword.
Chapter 27. The capital's Grand Bazaar was very quiet in the hours before dawn. It was about the only time the place was relatively calm, but even then there were still hundreds of workers getting their booths ready and stocking merchandise for the busy day to come. Radha was very familiar with the bazaar at this hour, because over the last few months this was the time that she'd normally sneaked away from her secret rendezvous with Devidas to go back to her family estate. It was that familiarity that told her something was wrong. The merchants had stopped working. They were all looking back the direction she'd come from, and there was nervous whispering. She overheard the word Inquisition repeatedly. Frightened, Radha hid among the people who were arriving to work and tried to blend in while she eavesdropped. A large group of inquisitors had been seen on their way to the Protector's compound. The judges often proclaimed that only the guilty feared the Inquisition, but everyone knew that was a lie. Radha was innocent. In fact, she knew that she was the victim, but she was still terrified of the Inquisition. The law gave them the power to sweep up anyone they suspected of treason or dealing in the forbidden arts, and many of those who were taken were never seen again. And if they were, it was only as desiccated corpses decorating the top of the Order's foul dome. Logically, she knew she should have run, but Devidas had been investigating a supposed inquisitor on her behalf. Was it possible that he'd angered them? Was her lover in danger? She had to know. So, the librarian made her way back toward the Protector's compound, doing her best to blend in with the merchants. The workers were afraid of the Inquisition too, but they were morbidly curious when the Inquisitor's attention was on someone else. It was rare to see more than a few masked inquisitors at a time. Judging by the number of lanterns, there had to be hundreds of them. It was like an army was marching through the bazaar. She'd never have guessed there were so many in the capital. Radha knew there were only a handful of protectors present. During her many recent visits to their compound, the most she'd ever seen at a time was 10, and most of those were barely more than children. They were a relatively tiny order, spread thin over all the continent. Why send an army of inquisitors if they weren't intending to arrest the Lord Protector? This is all my fault. The inquisitors had stopped in front of the compound's wall. The gates had opened, and a lone figure was waiting there to greet them. Radha's heart skipped a beat when she saw that it was Devidas. He was wearing nothing but a sleeping robe tied around his waist. A small group of inquisitors broke off. Their black armor made them look like gliding shadows, and they approached Devidas. She tried to get as close as possible so she could hear what they had to say, but luckily the lead inquisitor shouted his accusation so loudly The whole block could hear. "There has been treachery in the north. I bear a message for Lord Protector Devadas." For once the market had fallen silent enough to listen. "You found him." Somehow Devadas managed to sound bored, like an army beating down his door before dawn was of no particular note. "Speak. By order of the Council, the whereabouts of all protectors must be accounted for. The protectors within the capital are to remain confined to their compound unless authorized. If requested, protectors must submit to interrogation at the Inquisitor's dome." Devadas didn't so much as raise his voice. "What is the meaning of this?" The lead Inquisitor must have practiced beforehand, because he delivered his message with gusto. They must have wanted the whole city to know. "The traitor, black-hearted Ashok has escaped, killing members of the governing caste and hundreds of others across House Vidal." "Escaped? Why would he bother? The traitor only wants to die." "He was aided in his escape by protectors of the law." The crowd in the bazaar gasped. "Lies." "It was confirmed by a multitude of reliable witnesses." "They are mistaken," Devadas snapped. "The Council has declared that until the protectors of the law have been freed of this treacherous corruption, the entire order is suspect. Until those loyal to Ashok have been purged, the protectors are—" Devadas began walking away. "Where are you going?" the Inquisitor demanded. "To get dressed so I can go argue this foolishness with the judges." "Was I not clear? You're not allowed to leave your compound." Devadas stuck his head around the wall and surveyed the many lanterns. "What did you bring? 200 men? I have 20 senior protectors here." Rada knew that was a huge exaggeration, but the way the Inquisitor took a few steps back, he didn't know that. "We'd be finished with you in time for breakfast. If you plan on keeping us here, you'd best come back with a real force." "You would flout the law? You threaten to turn your blades against servants of the capital, like unto the Black Heart? You made your speech, and I'm sure by sunup the entire capital will be talking, but now you're beginning to annoy me. Go tell your masters that I'll demonstrate exactly how much love this order retains for the traitor by delivering his head to the Council myself." Then Devadas snapped an order, and his men closed the compound's doors in the Inquisitor's face.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com, thanks to Baen publisher Toni Weisskopf for stopping by, and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a claim to a 100,000-kilometer box of asteroids known to have reserves of nitrous oxide and observable sparkles that are either gold deposits or romance novel vampires. And a cup of Time Traveler's Irish coffee, which is when you put the whiskey in and just kind of trust the coffee will eventually appear. For David Weber and Jacob Holo, authors of the Gordian Protocol, please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.